Hello learners, welcome to the course Migrated Women's Literature. Our today's lecture is about the poem 1971 which has been taken from the collection titled Seam written by Tarfia Fazullah. Tarfia Fazullah was born in 1980 to Bangladeshi parents. She was born in America. She is a Bangladeshi American poet. Actually, the poem 1971 is a part of her research work. Tarfia went for her Fulbright scholarship and for that scholarship she went to Bangladesh, and there she had interviewed the war survivors, specifically the female survivors. Those women survivors are known as the Birongana. Birongana is a term in Bengali which means the warriors, the brave women. The poem actually talks about the Indo-Pakistan War of 1971. This war was one of the most important political as well as geographical event of the subcontinent. The Bangladesh War of 1971, which is referred to in this poem, needs to be talked with reference to the historico-political events of the subcontinent. In the year 1970, the Awami Party leader Mujibur Rahman, who was known as Sheikh Mujib, he won the general elections in Pakistan. At that time, Pakistan was ruled by the Chief Marshal Agha Muhammad Yahya Khan, who was the president of the Pakistan at that time, and he refused to accept the democratic choice of the majority. When Sheikh Mujib asked him for the charge of the government, he refused him. And when Sheikh Mujib went to meet him, when the followers of Sheikh Mujib, when they asked for their due right, he was imprisoned. Sheikh Mujib was imprisoned by Yahya Khan. At that time, Pakistan was in the need of progress, but Agha Muhammad Yahya, he supported anarchy. And Yahya Khan, he was the chief marshal at that time, and he was ruling, he was controlling the government. So he was, in a way, he represented the Pakistan, the entire country. But the East Pakistan was in favor of Sheikh Mujib. Agha Muhammad Yahya, he supported the military rule when Mujibur Rahman was in support of democracy. By the end of March 1971, there was a demand for independence, and this demand came from the Awami Party as well as the majority of the people. The demand was to create independent Bangladesh. Bangladesh, which was earlier known as East Pakistan. In the reaction of a demand, Yahya Khan ordered to arrest Mujibur Rahman. The arrest of Mujibur Rahman led to the bloodshed, and around 10 million people fled from East Pakistan to India. That is East Pakistan, that is now called Bangladesh. So around 10 million people during that era came to India from there. At that time, Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India, and she sent Indian army to Dhaka. Then Dhaka surrendered to Indian army, which resulted in the defeat of Yahya Khan. This poem talks about the contribution of women in the liberation war of Bangladesh. Women contributed in different ways. Some of them contributed directly, while others contributed indirectly. Women provided food, shelter and clothes to those soldiers who were struggling to save their life, and Many of them learnt guerrilla warfare also. These women also used to give secret information to freedom fighters. Later, many awards were given to the freedom fighters, but only a few were given to women. So, during the liberation war of Bangladesh, actually half of their population was women. So they, as I said, they contributed to that liberation war. Some of them contributed directly, while many others contributed indirectly, and as I have mentioned that many of them learned the art of guerrilla warfare so that they could serve as soldiers. Many others worked as nurses, while some helped by providing food, shelter, and bringing some sort of information, etc. Many prominent writers like Neelima Ibrahim, Jahan Ara Imam, Sufia Kamal, Furqan Begum, etc. have written about the contributions of the women in the Bangladeshi liberation war. They have also talked about the sacrifices which were made by these women, which were made by these Bangladeshi women. Though women had contributed and supported the freedom fight of Bangladesh, but gender plays a major role everywhere. Out of 676 gallantry awards, only 2 were given to women, and those were given to Dr. Sitara Begum and Taramon Bibi. There were many reasons behind undermining the contributions of women. Though women had contributed in various ways, yet their contributions were neglected. And the very first reason is obvious: the patriarchal society which could not digest the contribution of women in the freedom fight. Next reason is most of the women who took part in the freedom fight were from the lower caste or from poor families. So recognizing their contribution was unimaginable. The glorification stories are written mostly by the male writers whose perspective of presenting wars focuses on men specifically. That is another reason behind the neglect of the women freedom fighters. After around 17 years of war, some efforts were made towards the recognition of these women and towards the presentation of women's role during the wartime. By the time women writers started writing about the great women fighters, people already had their own world of history created by the male writers. So, initially, it was difficult for the people to believe on the stories of these women and to accept the stories of women's bravery. Let us discuss about the poem 1971 written by Tarfia Fazullah. The first part of this poem talks about the childhood scenes of the poet's life as well as the life of those Bironganas. So here in the first part, the poet shows that there is this interviewer who is in Bangladesh, and the interviewer is talking to the grandmother. The atmosphere that is presented in the first section of the poem shows that the people are safe, yet there are some unsettling presence of others. And we also find a contrast which is presented in the first section of the poem, where Tarfia Fazullah compares the oil extraction in West Texas and the life in Bangladesh, or the violence, increasing violence there in Bangladesh. We find the use of symbols and vivid imagery in this poem. So let us have a look at the first section of the poem. The poem is divided into different sections, and each section has 2 stanzas and sometimes 3 stanzas. In this first section, there are two stanzas which are: in West Texas, oil froths luxurious from hard ground, while across Bangladesh, bayoneted women stain pond water blossom. Your mother, age 8, follows your grandmother down worn stone steps to the old pond, waits breathless for her to finish untwining from herself the simple cotton sari, to wade alone into green water, the same color your mother thinks as a dress she would like to twirl. So in the first stanza, the poet says that there is this present life when she is in Texas. This is very much typical of diasporic writing, because diasporic writing creates a kind of a comparison between past and present. Here Tarfia Fazullah, being a diasporic writer, talks about the present life while she is there in Texas. She talks about oil froths luxurious from hard ground. She talks about oil extraction in West Texas, and she also talks about all those luxuries and safeties of this present life. Then she moves towards the past. She talks about the life there in Bangladesh. She says the bayoneted women, these Biranganas, whose efforts were not recognized by the government later on. However, at that time, while the war was going on, these bayoneted women, these Viranganas, they were there to safeguard the country. And here she presents the picture of her mother, who was a child, an 8-year-old girl at that time. And then there is another character who is the grandmother of the poet. She says that the young girl of 8 follows her mother and goes down into that pond, where the woman untwines her cotton sari and steps into that pond so that she could take a bath. Then she creates an image of that green color in the water. Because of the greenery around that pond, there is this reflection of green color in that water, which makes the water appear green. The green color is symbolic of calmness and tranquility. Then in the second stanza of the same poem, she writes, the world in, she knows as a dress she would like to twirl the world in. She knows the strange men joining them daily for meals mean her no harm. They look like her brothers do. Nights they jump back over the iron gate, drenched in the scents of elsewhere, only thinner, so thin. In the distance, thunder, though the sky reflected in the water. Her mother floats in Burns' bright blue. So in the second stanza of first section, she talks about those men who were fighting for the liberation of Bangladesh. These are the men who appear like brothers. The women, the Biranganas, the bayoneted women, they consider these men as their brothers, and they can come to their houses at any time and they serve them food. So as I said that many women contributed directly in that war while many others contributed indirectly. So serving food was a very big gesture at that time, giving food to those soldiers who were away from their houses, who were fighting for saving their nation, who were fighting for the liberation of Bangladesh, who were fighting for the establishment of democracy. So food, which is a source of life, so these women who could not fight in the war field, they were helping these soldiers by providing shelter and food. Let's move towards the next part. The second part of this poem presents cultural heritage and femininity. It contrasts the harsh realities of conflict and violence against the heritage of the nation, against the femininity or the female gender who are considered to be the supporters and the caregivers. So in the second section we also find a Bengali phrase Amar Peet Ta Dui Dena, which signifies a bond, a connection between narrator's mother and grandmother, the connection between mother and daughter. And this specific Bengali sentence also highlights the cultural impact. Though the poet is away from Bangladesh, she lives in America, yet by using a phrase from her mother tongue, she shows a very deep impact of culture and tradition on her writing. And we also see that there are references to different objects like soap, pond water. These are the objects that signify the cleansing of soul, cleansing of body at the same time. And these objects also signify the renewal, a new life. It is not only the cleansing of the body, but it is the cleansing of the soul, which refers to getting a new life. Let's have a look at the second section. There are again two stanzas in this section which go like this. Gather these materials, silvers of wet soap, hair swirling pond water, black oil. Amar peette dui dena, grandmother says. So mother palms the pink soap, slides it between her small hands before arching its jasmine-scented froth across her back. Gather these materials, the afternoon's undrowned ceremonies, the nattering of cicadas, yes, yes, yes. Mother watches grandmother disappear into water, light. Many leaved like bits of bombshells, gleaming like rose petals, upturned in wet grass like the long river in red twilight. So gather these materials. There are certain objects that are talked about in these two stanzas where we find a reference to soap and then the pond water, there is this black oil, and then she also talks about the bits, the pieces of bombshells which are gleaming under that light and looking just like rose petals. And she also talks about the scent of that soap and the grass. So all these things create a picture while coming together. And this is a picture where we see a woman who is bathing in the pond, and she asks her young daughter to rub her back. Then the small girl takes the soap in her hands and rubs it on her mother's back. So this is a kind of indication towards the ceremonial cleansing of the souls. It is not only bathing in the pond, but it refers to reviving the life, a sort of a new life, a sort of renewal of the soul which gets cleansed after pondering over different things, after thinking about various issues of life, and also after contributing for the betterment of the humanity. Now let's have a look at the part 3 of this poem. Part 3 is about global events such as protest and violence, etc., that is happening around the world. So self-immolation in Vietnam, drawing parallels to personal turmoils within the narrator's family. So war alters familial dynamics. This is what the narrator, the poet, has shown here in this section of the poem. She presents how the narrator perceives her mother's emotions and her grandmother's strength. So the emotion of a woman while another woman's strength is presented, and the poet creates a kind of a connection, a kind of a parallel here. And we also see in this section that the interviewer observes her mother's desire, her mother's longing and admiration for her grandmother's resilience and bravery. 1971, the entire world unraveling like thread, your mother pulls and pulls away from the hem of her dress. In America, the bodies of men and women march forward in protest, rage kindling their voices. In Vietnam, monks light themselves on fire, learning too late how easily the body burns. Soon the men whose stomachs flinch inward will struggle the curved blades of their bayonets into khaki-clad bodies. But for now they lean against the cool stone walls of your grandparents' house. Eyes closed as your mother watches her mother twirl in the pond, longs to encircle herself in ripples of light her fingers might arpeggio across green water. She loves the small diamond in her mother's nose, its sunlit surface glittering like curled hot metal she knows falls from the sky, though never before her eyes. So, 1971. So, now in this third section of the poem, the year is mentioned here. The time period is 1971, when the entire world seems revolving in front of the eyes of these people. And in this stanza, the young girl is presented pulling away the thread from the hem of her dress. And as she pulls away that thread, it seems she is unweaving that earth one by one. She is taking out the thread one by one, and this way she is unweaving the earth, like the earth is rotating in front of that little girl, and she is picking one after the other incidents from there, those incidents that are symbolically represented by that thread of the hem. The poet writes, there are different incidents happening around the world. The one is in America, when the bodies of men and women march forward in protest, when there are so many people who are protesting against something. So this is one of the incidents happening in one part of the world. The other incident, the next one that is mentioned in this section of the poem, is a monk who puts himself on fire in Vietnam. And then while people watch him burning, they realize how easily a body gets burned. So this line where Tarfia Fazullah writes, learning too late how easily the body burns, it represents the momentary life of human beings, the mortal nature of human life, that there is no guarantee of life, and sometimes we waste it without even realizing the purpose behind our lives. And she says that everywhere around the globe something or else is happening where people are not realizing what is the basic purpose of being a human. Some of us are protesting against some others, while someone is putting oneself on fire, while many others keep standing there. Instead of saving the person, they keep on watching that incident. So lots of bad things, lots of heart-wrenching events are happening around us. And while mentioning all these things that talk about the present, she again goes back in the past and talks about the era that was 1971, while those brave women were helping the soldiers to get their independence. She says, the men whose stomachs flinch inward will struggle the curved blades of their bayonets into khaki-clad bodies. The men who are not even worried about their food and shelter, who are not even thinking about themselves, they are fighting to save their nation. And then she presents a picture of a man who was standing, who was leaning against the cool stone walls of her grandparents' house. And here the mother of the poet, who was a young girl at that time, she watches her own mother bathing in that pond.